So welcome everyone to the last but very important session on creating the quality Magento 2 extension. With us, Mr. Gareth James, a senior PHP developer and working for a pure clarity. And today he will going to share his knowledge on creating quality Magento 2 extension and share some tips on how we can do that. So let me welcome Mr. Gareth James and let's start the session.
Hey, hello. Okay, right. Thanks for the intro. Okay, so I'm Gareth, as the chair said. I'm going to take you through creating quality Magento 2 extensions. So first, a little bit more info about me. So I am a senior PHP developer at Pure Clarity. We do intelligent e-commerce personalization, and I'm responsible for all of our PHP-based platform integrations. I've been working with Magento since about 2013, so it's quite a while now. Makes me feel old. And I am 3 times Magento 2 certified. Primarily, I've worked in ERP, platform integration extensions, and a few times over the course of my career, I've inherited poor quality code or poor quality system, and I had to improve and extend it over time. So today I'm going to take you through a whole bunch of guidelines, tips that I've picked up on from my years of extension development. And also from seeing common complaints in the Magento ecosystem. So hopefully this can be the basis of creating some good quality extensions. So first of all, let's go through why you should care about quality. So because people are buying a module already, yeah. So you haven't got these and you haven't got these things in place already. So why should you bother? So while it might work in the short term, these things will bite you in the long term, and these are the things that it will affect. So first of all, your brand perception. So developers are constantly talking to each other. And if your modules are lesser quality, then they won't recommend you to each other, or they'll actively tell each other to avoid you. And you don't want that to happen. That will affect your sales. So improving quality will increase your brand perception. Improving quality will also decrease your support costs, because if you've got issues in your extension and people are constantly having to contact you about them, then your developers are going to get tied up in handling those support issues rather than actually building out the features or maybe even doing other extensions. Obviously, if people are unhappy, they might want their money back. So increasing quality will actually mean that because you're having less issues, you're more likely to get less refund requests. And also, while this isn't for us, extension developers directly, it will actually decrease your installation costs of modules so that merchants don't have to spend as much with agencies and their developers in integrating us into their system, which obviously will feed into the whole recommendation of purchasing our modules. Okay, so first of all, let's go through what actually a good module should be. So first of all, it should be easily installable. So it should be available via Composer, as this will make it easier for developers to maintain their merchant projects, because they won't have to store the whole extension in a project repository, which I know from my agency time that can be painful. So make sure your dependencies are set correctly in your Composer file as well, so that they're installed too, and you're also not installing on versions that you don't support. You'll notice these little blue boxes appearing. When I refer to something, these are links off to guides or further reading to do. There's also a QR code for the slides at the end, so you can download them. Your module XML file should also be correct, so that Magento loads your code in the right order. For versioning of your module, make sure you use semantic versioning, so Semver, as this makes it easier for developers to know what the level of changes that are coming up in the extension release. This is a personal preference of mine, is it being listed on the Magento marketplace. So what this has in terms of quality is that all of the modules there have to pass the extension quality program checks. So this rubber stamps quality of your module. So there's various checks there that they do that all feed into quality. So once my module's installed, what should actually happen? So first of all, there should be no surprises. So this starts with, it only does what you advertise it does. So this means there should be no hidden or undocumented or just random features. which may lead to wasted time investigating where particular issues come or features come from, or if there's an issue with a random feature. We don't want that kind of thing there. It shouldn't, the features should work as documented, so your documentation needs to be updated and explain correctly how your module works. It also shouldn't break key Magento functionality, so like the cart or the checkout or the login process or anything like that, and also any unit or functional tests on top of that. So modules should be configurable. So what I mean by this is that they can be disabled by a config. So a merchant shouldn't have to go to the developer if they want to disable a module if it's causing problems. So I mean, that's just extra costs, and also it's useful for developers when they're investigating things. If you have a licensing system, which I've seen in some modules, and it just calls off to those systems, make sure your extension acts as if it's disabled if it's unlicensed. So I've worked on a project before where we had a module which, when it was unlicensed on the dev system, it would kill the checkout. So it made it impossible to do test orders on a dev system, and we had to constantly keep enabling and disabling the module, which is really painful. If you add any extra options to configs, such as like a search engine, your module shouldn't override that setting when it changes. So respect the rights of the admins to change the settings. Also on the configurable front, logging should be configurable. So don't always log, only log obviously critical errors, but any debug logging can be turned on and off as the developer needs it. So going on to the code itself, you should really be following the Magento coding standards, as this will ensure a base level of consistency and quality across the extensions. And it's more than just code formatting. There's a whole bunch of other things there too. So it checks for various other problems, things like unescaped text and insecure function usage. So there's some security checks too. It also helps flag deprecated function calls or deprecated class usage, so that you can get an idea of problems you might hit further down the line, or also things you might want to avoid using. It's actually quite easy to set up with developing. So there's a little guide. I use PHP Storm. Obviously, there are other IDEs available. There's a guide there to set up PHP Storm. And this way, if you've got it actively scanning your code that you were using PHP Code Sniffer while you're developing, it can stop issues even getting into the code base. Okay, so further to that in the code, so performance. A good module is performance minded, because performance is obviously a major consideration. As we've seen, there's all the hype about the Hoover theme, and it's very fast. I'm pretty sure those guys are going to be unhappy with us if we slow down that theme with our bulky bloated extensions. So there's a few tips here that we can do to avoid being slow. So first of all, load your data efficiently. So that's a very important thing there, is avoid loading in a loop. So if you've got a whole bunch of SKUs or things like that you need to load, try and load them in as little hits as possible. So Magento has a way you can do that, and that's repositories. However, if you've got more complex data requirements, so you want to join multiple tables, or you want to get very specific fields, and you don't really care about the rest, you want to go down the route of collections. So they can be a bit faster than repositories for those. So if your module is calling home for licensing checks or for other data purposes, ensure you only really call it when you need to. So does it really need to be on every page? Probably not, especially if it's a licensing check. They don't need to be on every page. You can handle that via the cron, really. Make sure your call homes don't have long timeouts either. So if there is some kind of issue with your system and your calls are responding slowly, you limit the time there so that it doesn't stack up calls and bog down the system, and also it just doesn't slow down page views for people. We do say 5 seconds as a rule. We could probably lower it to maybe a couple of seconds. If your call home fails completely due to an outage, then it shouldn't crash the site either. So it should again act like it's unlicensed or not configured. So it just disables that feature that relies on that call home. You also consider having a configuration option for a notification email should that happen. So further points on performance. If you've got data you need to show on the front end, there's a couple of options you have for showing that data in an efficient, performant way. So first of all, is caching. So you can make sure you could add a custom cache type if you need to, so that data doesn't get recalculated too soon, especially if it's complex data. This is a big one. We don't want to annoy people by adding cacheable people's full stats. That's a horrible one to do. And I've seen modules that have killed the full page caching for an entire site using that. So don't do it. If you have customer specific data you need to show on a site with full page caching, then make sure you use Ajax or Knockout, or if you're using another theme, the relevant JS framework or GraphQL for that. But if your data doesn't need the calculations to be run specifically on the front end, but can actually be moved to the back end, you could add a custom indexer to that, because if the data doesn't need to be recalculated all the time and it's based on fixed product data, then you absolutely should use an indexer there, and that way it will stop the front end being bogged down with more calculations. Okay. Finally, this is more of the in your developer setup. Make sure you've got ways of analyzing the performance of your module. So things like New Relic, Blackfire, or the XDebug profiler. Excuse me. They can help you track down any performance issues that may not be so obvious as well. Okay, so after performance, but also equal, if not more important, is security. So good modules are security conscious. So here are some very basic high-level tips on security. There's a couple of links at the bottom as well to more detailed security guides, because there's a lot of content here. So in templates and forms, make sure you escape your output in the PHTML files. That will help against cross-site scripting attacks. Forms, make sure you use the form key validation so that it make sure the post requests are coming from the right session and from the right place. Also validate and sanitize the inputs on the front end and the back end. This will make sure any people trying to submit dodgy data or corrupted data into your system. Also, once you've got your data and you've validated, sanitized it, don't use direct MySQL to put it in the database. You make sure you've created the right models and interfaces to use the Magento way of doing it. Direct MySQL will expose MySQL injection attacks, which obviously aren't good. There's a whole bunch of insecure functions which Magento is listed in that handy link there. So things like serialization and eval and things like that. Don't use them. Magento has some classes for transfer and serialization that you should use. As I say classes, I mean interfaces you should use for those. So try and use those for them and avoid insecure functions. So use HTTPS for any external API calls that you do, and that way you make sure any data you deal with is transferred securely. Obviously, there's loads of aspects of security, so I've added a couple of extra links at the bottom there. So your extension is going to be used by many developers, and from time to time, they may actually need to modify the behavior if it works, because a merchant wants it to work in a specific way. So a good module should be easily extendable. So first of all, it means it should be unencrypted. People should be able to read all of your code. If it is encrypted, then people are going to get stuck debugging or even extending your module as well. Make sure your methods are public in your classes so that so developers can use plugins to intercept the behavior of the classes. Use solid principles. So this is part of the coding standard, but it's worth repeating. So make sure your methods are small, single purpose, so that customizations on top of these can be very targeted and very small, and otherwise it gets really messy. Consider using interfaces there. So this has a double purpose, is that developers can override your classes should they need to using interfaces, using the standard interface method. But also it makes your, it's kind of cements your architecture a bit, so that developers will know that your code isn't going to change drastically because you've put it in an interface. Also, while this isn't directly related to the code, make sure you document any areas of extension that is going to be commonly extended. So for example, we've got a product feed where data gets sent across to the Peer Clarity system, and people will customize there. So we're documenting that, and perhaps even giving examples that developers can download to give them a jump start customizing it and saving them time. Okay, so Magento releases, we've got four, I believe it's 4 release sections a year. So when you're supporting multiple versions of Magento, you need to be a bit more mindful of changes you make, especially if you're supporting older versions as well. So this starts with supporting the PHP versions too. So make sure you don't use code that's only available like in the very latest versions of Magento or the older versions, so that you're compatible with all of the versions that you support. It's also very important you test against every version you support, because, well, obviously if you do a release and you break an older version, you're going to get more support calls. And be mindful of backwards compatibility. So sometimes that means holding off using a new feature until you can drop an older version. Sometimes it'll be handling dependencies and constructors to make sure that new or old dependencies are used. So testing is an important aspect. And given what I've just said about multi-version support, for example, if you support 2.2 plus, you're effectively supporting 22 versions of Magento, double that if you include commerce. So ideally, you want some automated testing coverage. We use Circle CI and GitHub Actions for this. This way, when you do a new release, you can easily test against all the versions you support using automation. There are obviously other automation tools out there and that are very widely used. So find the one that works for you. Make sure you have a manual testing plan as well, so that any changes you make get tested by a person, not just automated testing. And that way you can make sure the way it works for users is okay too. And if you don't have automated testing yet, you can use this manual testing plan as a basis for your automated tests. If you include your tests in the extension, then that allows developers to run those tests in their projects to make sure that if they face any local compatibility issues with your code. So that's a good thing to do. And also, when you're testing, make sure you run a Magento test with your extension installed. That allows you to test whether you're breaking key elements of Magento functionality. So documentation, good modules are well documented. So developers and merchants should be able to easily access detailed user guides, and they should give clear and easy to understand information about the functionality in your extension, giving tips and tricks on how to use it. The developer documentation should cover any frequently asked questions that they have, also guides on troubleshooting, things to look at, flow diagrams, such like, and also common areas of extension, like I mentioned before. Also release notes, they should be detailed and clear, including with the module if you can. If not, have a page on the website somewhere that or a support page that gives details of what the changes are, so that the developers will know what has changed, so they can know what to expect. And obviously, it's a bit more than just bug fixes and improvements, which we see in quite a few places. So having good support, but on top of this documentation is useful too. So support contact details should be easy to find. Maybe put it in a README, put it on admin pages you add. Make it as easy to find as possible. Your support team should be responsive, so acknowledging receipt fairly quickly. If you've identified a solution with a day or two, that's good. But obviously that may take a bit longer to actually fix issues, and people should be able to escalate issues if they're major. If sometimes things happen that take time to fix, it can take a week or two or something, but be open and honest with the customer and make sure that you communicate with them regularly, because the last thing they want to do is to feel completely left behind. Developers can be helpful and provide patches, so support them when they do this and don't discourage them. Also have a bit of a security policy there too, so have an email address or a form that customers can use to disclose security issues. Disclose any security issues you find or that have been reported, and when you've so that people will know if they've got to do something to their site to secure it. Also, don't ask for SSH details unless you really have to. You shouldn't really be able to. You should be able to do most of it without SSH details, like I found anyway. So if you don't have these things, how can you get there? So first of all, make sure you plan it well. Make sure you identify any issues you have, and plan the solutions, or at least high-level solutions for them, so you can plan the time you have. Any new work on your system should then start following to the coding standards. So any new work you do doesn't have to be redone later for quality. Make time in each release, if you can, to fix those issues. And also, when you're in an area and you're doing some major work, throw in some fixes there too, if you can. So this is a kind of a rough priority order I would do, but again, that's down to preference. First, security is obviously top of the list there, and it goes down based on down right at the bottom. What I mean by coding standards is things like maybe more like your code formatting, because by that point you've fixed all the rest of the things. So just a quick summary there. So these are the guidelines that I've suggested for a good quality extension. So we could probably have a separate 20, 30, 40-minute talk on each of these points. So it's a lot to pack in a short space of time. So there's quite a big picture here. Well, if everyone follows the steps, then we'll all be much better off for it. So thank you very much. There's a QR code there and some details if you've got any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Gareth. Let me share the questions.
Okie dokie. So the first one, so apart from CI/CD tools, how do MFTF play a major role in creating? So with the MFTF, it would be that, so obviously you want to create tests for your module specifically, but also you would want to use the MFTF test to verify that your module isn't breaking Magento functionality. So you can use, there are commands that I've linked in some of the guides there on how to run those in your CI tools. Again, that's something we could cover in much more detail. It's something that I'm looking at doing later in the year, to talk a bit much more about that kind of detail. Do you recommend, so that's the first one. All right. Do you recommend any open source debug profiler? So I actually use the Xdebug one. It can be quite useful. There's, I think it's Apache Kcache grind that you need to install locally as well to read those files. And it can be a bit of a steep learning curve with that. But once you get the hang of it, you can. That's a good one to start with. The other one is it's done by Mage Specialist. I'll see if I can find a link and I'll share it on Twitter. So Mage Specialist has done like a Chrome extension and a module that you can install into your local development environment, and that will give you a breakdown of a little bit like a light version of New Relic or Blackfire, and you can use that, and that's quite good. So I'll see if I can find you a link to that. So any suggestions to check or implement something in the extension? So if any other installed extension create conflict with our extension? Yes, that's a good one. So I guess the thing you want to do there is make sure your code is kind of non-intrusive on the system. So make sure you're using interfaces, hooking into Magento interfaces or events and things like that, and not using preferences for classes, because if you're using things like events and interfaces and plugins, then you'll tend to see less compatibility issues. Unfortunately, yes, if you do hit a conflict, it can be a bit of a manual process. Though I believe there is I'm sure it rings a bell that there is a tool out there somewhere that Magento are working on with compatibility, or there may even be something on the EXTDN website. So yeah, hit me up with a message and I'll see if I can find.
Okay, Gareth, thanks for the very insightful session on Magento 2 quality extension. I hope all attendees has already enjoyed your session. So let's see you in next year in mid
Yeah,
Magento 2020.
Yeah, hopefully in
2022.
person this time.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thank you.